This is a very special weekend. Please give it up for Mr. Eric von Daniken. Eric.
Thank you. You are the greatest. Thank you for your introduction. Perfect. Okay. So, okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I'm from Switzerland. My English is not the best. I still have a heavy German accent, but I hope you will understand me. So, it's a long, long time ago. No one knows how long, but at least 6,000 years. And then a gigantic spaceship surrounded our planet. How do we know this? We know it first from old Indian texts. There are many, many old Indian texts which are at least 6,000 years old. And there, in the 5th book of the Mahabharata, with the name Mausala Purva, there you can read that of a sudden, 3 cities, they call it cities, not spaceships, because they had no word for spaceships. 3 cities surrounded our planet Earth. The people who were watching these cities in the firmament, they were talking about them. And of a sudden, from these 3 cities, smaller vehicles descended to our planet. The old Indians called these smaller vehicles Vimanas. There were different types of Vimanas, not only one shape. It's like today we have different types of aircrafts. A helicopter doesn't look the same thing like as a jumbo jet, or a propellant aircraft is not the same thing as a jet airliner. So there were different types of Vimanas. Now, and out of these smaller vehicles, we would call them today space shuttle. All of a sudden, so-called gods came out. So-called gods. We all know that there are no gods. There is only one God. But our ancestors, in Stone Age people, they could not understand what was going on, so they believed that these visitors are some gods. The word gods is a misunderstanding. There were never gods. They simply called the extraterrestrial gods. So these so-called gods came out. They looked around the planet, and they chose a few of the young men to teach them. One of the young men, his name was Arjuna, and Arjuna was brought up to the sky. He learned the language of the extraterrestrials. They taught him in writing, and later they brought him back to the planet Earth. And here, of course, the people asked him, Arjuna, where have you been? What have you seen? And Arjuna was writing down his experiences with the so-called gods. He said, he was up there in this city over the planet. And as higher he came, he saw a lot of smaller cities up there. Some of them were composite that they looked like different bulls, one bull next to the other bull. That's what the eyewitness Arjuna said 6,000 years ago. He himself was brought up with an object called the Vimana. As I said before, the Vimanas were a smaller object. Arjuna even knows the name of his pilot who brought him up there. His pilot's name was Matali. They brought him up there. He saw gigantic cities. He called them cities because in his time he had no word for spaceship, neither for mother spaceship. He was taught up there. He learned the language of these extraterrestrials. And then he realized that these extraterrestrials, they had fights, discrepancies among them, each other. Some of these extraterrestrials, they wanted to have sex with humans on the planet. Others didn't say, no, that's forbidden. We cannot do this. Some of them want to steal our raw material. Others said, no, we are not allowed to do this. So there was a fight in heaven, a war in heaven, described by Arjuna in the 5th book of the Mahabharata in the Mausala Purva. 2 of these cities were destroyed. And from the earthlings, it looks as if 10,000 of little stones are falling down from the sky. Now, when we hear such a story, 6,000 years old, our first reaction is, this is all fantasy. That's all dreams. A war in the sky, a war in heaven, that's rubbish. They simply had dreams. But it's not the dream. The funny thing is, Every mythology, every great mythology, start with Greek mythology, it doesn't matter what, starts with the war in heaven. In Greece, for example, the god Zeus first has to fight against Kronos. Take our own religion, be Jewish or Christian. When I was a boy, they taught me, Eric, when you finally die and you were a brave man, you will go to heaven. Heaven is the place of happiness. In heaven you are assembled with God and the angels. And later I learned as an adult, there was a fight, a war in heaven. Don't you remember? Of a sudden an archangel with the name of Lucifer comes to the throne of the Almighty God and said, we don't serve you anymore. And then the archangel Michael came to destroy Lucifer and his disciples. If heaven would have been the place of absolute happiness, then a war in heaven is impossible. Then you are happy. Then you have no opposition, nothing. So we should change the word heaven into sky or into space. Then it makes sense. The same situation we have with the word like angels. We are taught the angels are the good ones. You know, angels, they are represented in Stone Age cave paintings with helmets, halos. We make designs, they have wings. They were the nice guys, the angels. But in reality, some of these angels were a catastrophe. They killed and destroyed thousands and thousands of people directly from the air. Here, for example, this is in Egypt. This is the temple called Edfu. And on this wall of the Edfu temple, ich denke, der sei echt dort überhaupt nicht. This wall of the Edfu temple is described how a god, his name was Horhut, came down and helped the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh said, please, I need your help because I'm surrounded by enemies. Now this god with the name of Horhut destroyed all the enemies of the Pharaoh from the air. Now this is in Egypt. But the same story we read in the Bible. Just take the second book of the Kings. For example, this is one of the warriors called the god Ahura Mazda from Persia. The same story we have in the Bible. Just read, for example, the second book of the Kings, chapter 19, verse 35. And there it says, and the angel came down from heaven and killed 185,000 Assyrians. On the next morning, there were only dead bodies on the ground. An angel from heaven killed 185,000 Assyrians. We have to change the word angel into the word extraterrestrial. Now I changed two words. I changed heaven into space. I changed angels into extraterrestrials. Now, we just have to change 10 keywords in the ancient texts, and I changed the whole context of the old text. And it's time we do this. We really have to do this. So, we have these inscriptions of the so-called angels, but the angels were extraterrestrials. And one of the very clear descriptions, which you easily can control, and which was part of Chariots of the Gods, which I wrote more than 50 years ago, comes from the Bible. Remember the story in the Bible concerning the prophet Ezekiel? Ezekiel, we find him at the end of the Bible, the end of the Old Testament. And I first now show you 5 pictures coming out of old Bible. I mean old Bible, 200 years old. Simply to give an impression what our forefather had in mind when they read the text of Ezekiel. Later, I explain you how we came to make a modern explanation of the whole Ezekiel story. And finally, I will show you a computer animation concerning Ezekiel, which is one of the best you can ever see. So, Ezekiel, by the way, you have to know by profession, he was priest, high priest at the Temple of Jerusalem. On his time, roughly 600 BC, the Jewish community, Jerusalem, was captured by the Babylonians. And all the high society of the Jewish community went as slaves to Babylonia, including Ezekiel. As a high priest, he belonged to the high society. So he was a slave in Babylonia. And he writes, they were working there for the Babylonians, and of a sudden the firmament opened. These people, the slaves, hear the noise in the firmament. They saw a light and something was coming down. They all were afraid. Of course, they believed God is visiting us. Ezekiel as a high priest, he's the first one who thinks, I have to give honor to the God. So he as the first one, he stands up, and then he realizes this is not God. And he describes what happened. So this is Ezekiel out of an old Bible. And just before him, he sees a gigantic thing. He calls this gigantic object, the whole thing, he calls the splendorness of God. The whole thing is the splendorness of God, or the splendorness of the highest. I must make a personal remark. I was educated in a Catholic boarding school led by Jesuits. We had to translate part of the Bible, including Ezekiel, from Greek to Latin and from Latin to German. And in the original Ezekiel, the word God never appears. In our translations, be it the German or the English translation, we read the splendorness of God. In the original, it says the splendorness of the highest, which is quite a difference. So all this together, he calls it the splendorness of the highest. He says, up there, I saw something like glittering rays. There was a throne inside. And on this throne, the highest was sitting. In your Bible translation, it says, on the throne, God was sitting. No, in the original of the Ezekiel. Then he saw 4 living creatures. And he says, these 4 living creatures had wings. Each one had 4 wings. And when the wings moved, a terrible noise appeared. Ezekiel describes the noise and compares the noise with the thundering of a waterfall. So these wings must have made a terrible noise. Then he describes the legs. The legs were out of metal, definitely. Ich zeige einfach weiter the metal. And then he comes and describes the wheel. He sees 4 wheels, and now he does not understand anything anymore. You know, wheels at Ezekiel's time, they can go forward and backward. A normal wheel. But the wheels you see here, on the splendor of the highest, they can go forward, backward, right and left at the same time without making a steering movement. Imagine you are sitting in your car. Now you have your steering wheel. Now you turn because you want to go to the curve. The front wheels turn because you go into the curve. Ezekiel describes a wheel which goes forward, backward, right and left without ever make a turning movement. That's what confuses him completely. He describes this wheel 4 times. And then finally the legs, the body, and all the details. So this you all can read in the Bible, in the book of Ezekiel. I just have assumed a few keywords. Roughly 35 years ago, I had a secret speech here in the United States, in Huntsville, at NASA, you know, the Space Administration. Secret because we both parties, NASA and I, we agreed not to go to public. NASA did not public that Eric von Däniken was there, and I did not public that I was at NASA. All the main rocket people, professors, engineers were there, including Wernher von Braun, etc. After my speech at NASA, we had a dinner, and then Mr. Joe Blumrich came to me. Blumrich was at that time the head of construction department at NASA. He was coming originally from Austria, so he speaks German and English fluently. And while we had dinner, he came to me and said, Eric, that was quite fascinating. But you know, you spoke about a prophet called Ezekiel in the Bible, but in the Bible you will definitely never find any technology. You know, the Bible, these are visions. These are dreams. They saw God on his throne driving around. But this is not reality. It's just imagination. You will never find any technology in the Bible. Anyhow, he meant very friendly. I am the first one who pointed him to Ezekiel. He never heard something about Ezekiel in his life before. And he told me, now I want to read the Bible. Soon in the next weeks when I have time, I want to read this Ezekiel personally. And he did. He started to read Ezekiel word by word. And he got very confused because Ezekiel makes very, very clear statements. Statements how big the wheel was, how big he was, etc. So you could draw conclusions. Then 2 other NASA engineers came to Blumrich's office and asked him, Joseph, what are you doing with the Bible on your desk? We are engineers, we are rocket constructors. And he said, you remember this Von Däniken here talking us about the Bible, Ezekiel? This is fascinating. I just read this Ezekiel story. We really are able to reconstruct what Ezekiel was describing. You remember, Ezekiel described the whole object as the splendorness of the highest. Now NASA analyzed phrase by phrase of Ezekiel. They start to make designs and they start to make calculations. And finally, they had the object. And this was what it looked like. This is what Ezekiel called the splendorness of the highest. So the whole thing, the totality, is the splendorness of the highest. On the top, he saw something glittering. And inside, there was a chair, a throne. And on this throne, the highest was sitting. The throne was nothing else than the chair of the commander of the spaceship. And he has his spacesuits on. That's why he was glittering. And then he describes the wings, the wings which make a terrible noise. And he describes the detail, including the wheel. And now it becomes complicated. You know, wheels, I told you, at Ezekiel's time, they can go forward and backward. But Ezekiel describes a wheel which goes forward and backward and right and left at the same time, which confuses him completely. Now NASA started to reconstruct a new wheel. This new wheel is separated in different sections. Every section has its own wheel, which you can turn on one side or the other side. Of course, with that wheel, you can go forward or backward. If this wheel should move towards you, only the lower section would move towards you or back. And with this wheel, you can go in any direction without making a movement. The wheel never turns as our wheel at the car. In every direction, right on the angel, you can move with this. By the way, NASA received an international patent for that wheel. I think that's very funny. We have a patent on the wheel. It's at the moment, they use it on Mars, on the Mars robot, but the original idea comes from Ezekiel. Now, when you read Ezekiel, you will realize that Ezekiel describes the splendorness of the highest, this object, from chapter 1 to 40. And in chapter 41, something different happened. He says, the splendorness of the highest arrived again. That means a second time. This space shuttle was descending a second time to Ezekiel. And this time, Ezekiel writes, the hand of the highest took me on my chest and put me on the chair. In my modern interpretation, simply he was taken up to the co-pilot's seat. Then the splendorness of the highest goes up. Ezekiel feels the gravity on his chest. He says, and the hand of the highest pressed upon my chest. But he has no idea where they go. So he writes in the Bible, they brought me to a very, very high mountain. He states clearly, not a high mountain, a very, very high mountain. They were flying over the mountain, and all of a sudden, under him, something like a big village or a little city appears with different houses. And in the center of this city is something like a temple. Ezekiel, in his books, does not say in the original, it was a temple. He says, it looked like a temple, because he doesn't know what it is. Maybe you have to ask yourself the question, what is a temple? What was a temple 5,000 years ago? A temple was a building for the gods, nothing else. Later, we made out temple spiritually for the gods. In antiquity, it was simply a house where the gods, the so-called gods, the extraterrestrials, were living. So they are flying over this little city, and beneath them is something like a temple. And the splendorness of the highest, and Ezekiel is sitting in there, slowly goes into the building, and he hears the noise of the wheels at that time in every detail. Finally, they came to a standstill, and of a sudden, one of these glittering beings, a man, human-like being, glittering clothes, comes to Ezekiel. And in the beginning, he says, he looks at Ezekiel and says, oh, humans, you have eyes to see, but you see nothing. You have ears to hear, but you hear nothing. And then the stranger, of a sudden, has a measuring device in his hands. And he orders Ezekiel, now you measure this building, every detail. Ezekiel, in the meantime, knows clearly this is not God. He's not afraid again. He asks back, why should I measure this building? And the other one says, that's the reason why we brought you here. And he starts to measure. Length, large, every step, every stone, every detail. Read it in Ezekiel, starting at chapter 41. Pages of measurement. These measurements, a German engineer, his name was Hans-Herbert Bayer, he studied these measurements. And he asked himself, is this a real building or is this just biblical imagination? And like Blumrich did, the NASA people only reconstructed the splendorness of the highest, the whole body. And now this German engineer group only reconstructs the so-called temple, the building. One day, I received a large letter at my desk at home, yellow envelope with 30 pages in there, and there I saw fantastical technical designs, and the letter of a German engineer. I didn't know him personally at that time, Mr. Hans-Herbert Bayer, and he said, dear Mr. von Däniken, we reconstructed the building according to Ezekiel's measurement. We did not add 1 centimeter, 1 inch. We did nothing take off. We exactly took the dates which Ezekiel gave us in the Bible. And this was the reconstruction. That's how this building looked like. I was very confused and very happy. I visited this engineer, Hans-Herbert Bayer, and I asked him, do you have an idea what NASA made? You remember, NASA only reconstructed the flying machine, the splendorness of the highest. The German engineers only reconstructed the house, the building. The German, of course, knew nothing about the American scientists. I brought the two groups together, and both fit perfectly together. So the so-called temple was simply the earthly space station, you know, for the space shuttle. Had nothing to do with the holy thing. Now, once you have make these analyses, you should tell something about the Bible. I told you I had in young years translated the Ezekiel, and I know what's the story in there. In theology, and these are honest and wonderful people, it's not a question of conspiracy. In theology, they believed that Ezekiel has a vision. He sees the Almighty God sitting on a chair on his throne, flying around. Now, I personally, I am a deep believer in God. Still today, I am one of these few persons who pray. But my God does not need a vehicle in which to move around from point A to point B. My God is all over. And the vehicle of God does not make noise and trembling and loud noise and sand blowing up and heat, etc. So I don't believe in the vision. I said, no, that was not the vision. That was a reality. Now, the theologians believe that Ezekiel has the visions. He sees the Almighty God on his flying chariot of the God flying around. And then in the second part of the Bible, where Ezekiel gives all this measurement of this building, the theologians believe now he has a vision of a future temple in the future Jerusalem, which is completely rubbish again. You know, if you know the Hebrew language, the original written form in which Ezekiel was written, it's written in a Semitic language. In a Semitic language, you have only consonants, you know, R, N, Y, etc. But no R, E, O, etc. And from the grammatic, there is no future. It all is written in the present. So there was a temple. I saw the temple. I measured it. Now theologians, they believe he has a vision of the future. So when you read Ezekiel, you will read there, and there will be a temple which will be so long and so large, etc., which is not correct. The correct translation is not there will be in the future. The correct translation is there was a building so long, so large, etc. By the way, theological version does not function anyhow not. Ezekiel describes, and they brought me on a very, very high mountain. Where in Jerusalem or near Jerusalem is a very, very high mountain? I know the region, it's nothing, a few hills, that's all what's there. Nothing of a high mountain. They brought him on a very, very high mountain. He doesn't fit to Jerusalem, neither to the future of Jerusalem. He was on a complete different place. Now, we made a computer animation to explain you what Ezekiel really saw. Look at this. They were slaves. They was captured by the Babylonians on the river with the name of Chebar. And then they hear a noise in the sky. In orbit is a mother spaceship. From this mother spaceship, a smaller vehicle is left out. Only when the smaller vehicle reaches the atmosphere, the noise begins. Outside, where there is no air, you hear no noise. Only now. So they hear the noise. They see a vehicle coming down. They are all afraid. Ezekiel, as a high priest, is afraid, but his colleagues, the slaves, the workers are all afraid. They all fell on the ground. They all believe, now we see the real Almighty God. Ezekiel, as a high priest, as a first, he stands up because he wants to give reverence and honor to the Almighty God. And then Ezekiel realizes, this is not God. And then he starts to write, to describe what he sees, the wings, the wheels, the noise, the detail, everything. He describes what he sees and the splendorness of the highest. He gives the detail of the wheels. He realized that the wheels can go in all four their directions without making a steering movement, which confuses him completely. He writes it down 4 times. Then he was taken himself up. They put him on the chair of the co-pilot. And they fly away. And Ezekiel feels when they start the pressure. He says, and the hand of the highest pressed upon my chest. He doesn't know where they go. That's why he writes, they brought me on a very, very high mountain. He doesn't know the name of the mountain, but definitely it was not Jerusalem. Neither Jerusalem at his time nor in the future. Up there, he sees something like a small city, and in the center of it, something like a temple, a building of the gods. He's sitting in the splendor of the highest himself. I assume his co-pilot would have calmed him down and said, don't be afraid, human, don't be afraid. Just write everything down what you realize here, because you have to write it down for your future generations. So Ezekiel writes what he sees. The splendorness of the highest came to a standstill over this building, the so-called temple. Slowly, they sunk into the building. At that occasion, Ezekiel writes, and the noise of the wheels were at that time double as loud as before in the desert, because now he hears the echo. The echo comes back from the walls. The noise is double as loud. Finally, the splendorness of the highest came to a standstill. Ezekiel can stand out. And then some of these extraterrestrials arrived in his glittering clothes. When he sees Ezekiel, he simply says, oh, come on, humans. You humans have eyes to see, but you see nothing. You have ears to hear, but you hear nothing. And then, of a sudden, he has a measuring device, and he orders Ezekiel to measure the whole temple. And Ezekiel does measure the temple. Ezekiel has the courage to ask back, why? Why should I measure this temple? And the other says, that's the reason why we brought you here. Then the Ezekiel book stops. The Ezekiel book in the Bible stops abruptly. It has no final. We don't have the whole Ezekiel text. So why should a group of extraterrestrials take from a group of humans, the group of slaves, the leader, Ezekiel? Why should they bring him to their space station on a high mountain? Why should they ask him, you have to make measurements? Why? What's all the purpose of all that? At Ezekiel's time, they all believed this is the real God, the God of the universe. Ezekiel himself is a high priest. They captured his high priest. They brought him away. Maybe for a few hours, maybe for a day, what do we know? And then they brought him back to his people. Now his people, his friends, his colleagues are asking him, Ezekiel, You are back here. Wonderful. Are you in good health? Have you been hungry, thirsty? Have you had pain, something? But Ezekiel is very happy. He says, no, I was on a very, very high mountain. I was flying there. There was a temple. I had to measure the temple. Here are the measurement dates. Because his society believes that all this has to do with the real God, the omnipotent God. And Ezekiel himself is a high priest. His measurement dates and his report is not thrown away to ashes. They keep it into the holy books. They believe it has to do with God, the real God. The extraterrestrials knew exactly this primitive society will grow up, will develop a technological evolution. 3,000 or 4,000 years later, the holy texts are still here. Normal texts, they disappear, but not the holy books. The holy books are translated into many languages, as we have it with the Bible and Ezekiel. So the future society, maybe 3,000, 4,000 years later, they will read this text of Ezekiel. The future society are still strong believers in God, but not low believers in God, in so little gods which does not exist. They will realize, hi, this is a technological description. Wheels which can go in every direction. Legs out of metal. The splendorness, the wings we mentioned, they will realize this is technology which somebody described thousands of years in the past. And now the humans will start to ask questions. They will ask questions maybe, did we have a higher society before, a higher technological advanced society? Or was this a visit from outer space? And if it was a visit from outer space, where is the proof? Have these extraterrestrials just disappeared without leaving something? That's exactly what they wanted. Because of Ezekiel, and not only of Ezekiel, in Old Indian we have Arjuna, the one who was taken away too. And in other texts, they want that the future societies stop and open these texts. They have to read these texts. They have to, hey, come on, something is wrong with our past. And that's exactly what we have today. Because of Ezekiel, because of these old texts, we have this new question with question marks. That's what they wanted. They wanted to bring us to the question, what is the proof? What is the time capsule? What is the what something these so-called gods left behind it? Another story which I just come very short with is Enoch. Enoch in the Bible, in the Old Testament, you just read 2 phrases about him. All what you read, Enoch was the 7th patriarch before the great flood. The 7th patriarch, the first was Adam, the second was his son Seth, etc. Enoch was the 7th before the great flood. And the Bible said Enoch was the first human who disappeared in a flying chariot from the earth. So the Jewish community and the Christian community believes that Enoch disappeared with God, but one day he has to return with his body to die here on this planet. So in the Bible, you have only 2 phrases about Enoch. So where does this book of Enoch comes from? 180 years ago, a British explorer, a British explorer, came to Ethiopia. He was also looking for God 180 years ago. And he went into a convent and he learned the language of the Ethiopian at that time. And once he knew the language, he went to the old library of the convent, and in the library he found the book of Enoch. He knew the word Enoch from the Bible, but now a book of Enoch. So he translated the book of Enoch from Old Ethiopian first into English, later from English into German. Now, I can only show you a German version. You know, these are very big, thick volumes. The Apokryphon und Pseudepigraphen des Alten Testamentes by Professor Dr. Emil Kau translated. And in there, we find 126 pages about the book of Enoch. What is so fascinating about Enoch? He writes in the first person, I version, eyewitness. Not in the second person, not I heard, they told me. No, he says what happened to him. So he describes that he was 12 years old. The whole village wanted to go to sleep. Then they hear the noise in the sky, and they saw a light in the sky. And they all were afraid and ran away, except he. He said, I was standing there. Then a light comes down to the earth, and two beings came out close to Enoch, the two beings in glittering clothes. It was all glittering. Now, Enoch was afraid too, and he fell down on the ground. He writes in his book, I smelled the human earth, the humanity, humidity of the earth. Anyhow, of a sudden, he's taken up on his shoulder, and somebody speaks in his language. Don't be afraid, human. We won't hurt you. Now, for the first time, we have to ask ourselves, how come that extraterrestrials speak the language of Enoch? It's very easy. In our time, and some 100 years ago, our ethnologists went to the upper Amazon River or to the upper Nile in Africa, and they came together with different tribes. Now, these different tribes had wonderful cultures, but none of them spoke English or German or Spanish or whatever, French. They had their local language. It was never a problem for the ethnologists to learn the language of the natives. It's a question of 3, 4, 5 months, and you can talk together. These extraterrestrials who were here thousands of years ago, they behaved themselves like today's ethnologists would do. They observed a certain group. By observing, they learned their language. With their technology, computer, etc., they would have learned the language immediately, probably in 2 or 3 weeks. So when some of the extraterrestrials speaks the language of Enoch, I am not shocked. It's absolutely normal. They can use it. So the one says to Enoch, don't be afraid, human. We won't hurt you. They say, if you wish, we take you with us and we teach you. And the young Enoch, he's not afraid. He says, yes, I wish. So they take him away. They bring him up to the sky. He describes it in every detail. He sees giant objects over the earth. Of course, he also does not have a word like spaceship or mothership. He says giant diamonds were up there, glittering, doors opened. We entered into the doors. He came to different gardens. He came to a big room with a throne in the center. And there the highest was sitting, etc., etc. Like Arjuna in the Hindu mythology, Enoch learns the language of these extraterrestrials. Once he knows the language, they give him a writing device and they dictate him books. Many, many books. He says, they dictated me more than 100 books. All books about science, about astronomy, about the calendar, etc. Enoch is the first one, by the way, who gives the names of these extraterrestrials. They sound like this. Look. And these are the names of their leaders. The name of the first is Jekun. He's the one to seduce the children of men, etc. Enoch gives 36 languages. So I even know the names of these fellows who were here thousands of years ago. And these group of human-like beings, obviously they wanted sex. They wanted sex with beautiful daughters on this planet Earth. And this was forbidden. The commander of the spaceship said, you are not allowed to have a sexual contact with them. So there was a mutiny on board. They were against the commander. And they went down and had sex with humans. Enoch describes it like this. Look. But when the sons of heavens saw that the daughters of men were fair, they admired them and desired to mate with them. And they said to each other, we will take them as wives. Altogether, there were 200 which descended upon the mountain Hermon of the days of Jared. Jared is the father of Enoch. Now you think this is again imagination? Hey, some extraterrestrials wanted to sex with human. I'm sorry, just look at the Bible. We have the same thing here. In the Bible, the first book of Moses. When the humans began to multiply and have daughters, the sons of the gods, in some translation you can read, the fallen angels, saw that they were fair and they took them as their wives. Not only Enoch, the same thing in Hindu mythology, there was sex between the extraterrestrials and the humans. Why should they have the same body, the same sexual apparatus as we? I come back to this at the end of my speech. So Enoch describes what happened. They dictate him all kind of things. One example, I always hear from the critics and the skeptics, come on, Eric, Enoch, the book of Enoch, this is all a dream. He had a dream. That's all. Now, Enoch describes And my leader said to me, human, look out of the window. Do you see this little light out there? You humans, you call it moon. But the moon has no light by itself. The moon receives his light from the sun. And then he explains him why the moon sometimes disappears, is full, is half, etc. The teacher of Enoch says to him, young human, you see this glittering, bright, shining light? You humans, you call it the sun. You see the other little lights here in the sky, on the nighty sky? You call it stars. Each star is a sun like your sun. And he explains how planetary systems function. He explains that around our planet, our sun, different planets turn, including the Earth, in 365 days, plus leak hours, not leak year, leak hours. So very precise. These are astronomical details. This is scientific details. You cannot dream that. A human in Stone Age, before the Great Flood, he was taught. They also teach him in astronomy. They teach him in calendar. They teach him in engineering, in all kind of things. And he writes, all this I handed down to my son Methuselah with the order, "Know you, my son Methuselah, keep all this. Keep it for the human generations after the great flood." They told him that the gigantic great flood will come. You remember the great flood? Everybody remembers that. And in the Bible they said, well, it was a punishment of God. But I know 100 mythologies of the planet. And in every mythology you have a great flood. You know, the Indians in the highland of Colombia, or the Indians somewhere, the Eskimos in Alaska, the Inuit, it doesn't matter, far in Africa, they all know the story of the great flood. And you remember, it was always a so-called God who descended, who warned the group of the human, who warned them in advance a gigantic flood would come. None of these gods was an omnipotent God. Could not, like a miracle, just like this, here you have a ship. Now, they give them order, you have to construct a ship. To construct a ship means falling trees, measurement, building. To construct a ship is technology. To construct a ship, this takes at least 1 year, if not more than 1 year. So all these so-called gods, they knew at least 1 year ahead that the gigantic flood was coming. Not like just us, weather forecast, well, in two weeks it will rain. Forget it. It was planned long before. Otherwise, they could not build a ship. Technology, they knew it exactly. So they did it, and they survived it. And then all our forefathers, prehistoric time, everything was destroyed by the flood. They wanted to reprint, to show their coming generations how the gods look like. Very brief. This is near Switzerland, in the border to Italia. It's called Val Camonica. This here is in your country, Arizona, at the Hopi territory. Mach noch schnell weiter hier. When you fly to Nazca in Peru, this gigantic figure here is 29 meters high. One arm pointed to the sky, the other pointed to the ground. 29 meters high, flying on the way to Nazca, direct before the plain of Nazca. Even in archaeology, they call it the Great Martian God. All these so-called gods. Here you cannot see nothing because it's near the city of Ica. Ica is in Peru. This figure points directly to the sky. It looks like this. You cannot see it from the ground. You have to fly. Otherwise, you have no chance to see it. The Sahara Desert, Africa. It's far away from South America, from Nazca. Far away from the Hopi Indians in your country. Look at this. The original of the figure is 6 meters high. 6,000 years old. This continues all over the world. This is in Australia. The so-called gods were always represented with helmets, with halos, with rays around their heads. Now, this again, Australia. You all realize that between Australia, between North America, Hopi territory, between South America, Nazca, Peru, between the Sahara Desert, are thousands and thousands of kilometers. There are oceans. And in our prehistoric time, our forefathers had no contact together. You could not just book a fly over there to Las Vegas. So why have they represented their gods all in the same manner, with helmets and halos around their head. Worldwide. And the people had no contact between each other. Later, they learned to chisel, to make figures. This is in Tulum. Tulum is Mexico, not far from here, directly on the Caribbean Sea. The whole city, the Maya city of Tulum, is dedicated to the descending gods. You see spread legs here, and the head, and then his hands, like somebody is lying on a bobsledder. His hand, and he always has wings. They fly down from the sky. They are represented like this. The whole city of Tulum is dedicated to the descending gods in Maya. Then worldwide, what we had in cave paintings before, later when they learned to make figures, to chisel, to paint, they represented their gods. This is in the Museum of Guatemala City. But the world is full of these things. This is in Japan. Now Guatemala, today's Guatemala had nothing to do with Japan. This is prehistoric Japan. They call it Dogu figures. The prehistoric Japanese people believed that this is one of the gods. But also in prehistoric times, the Japanese know nothing about glasses here. So what have they copied? Why have they represented the gods worldwide in the same way? This one here, this sense, you know, he has a helmet on. He has a mic on his lips. His hands are bending down, his feet upward. This you find in La Venta. La Venta is near the city of Villahermosa in Mexico. He descends to the humans. In your country, the Hopi Indians in Arizona, just go to the Hopi Indians and go to a souvenir shop there. You find some of these pictures and some of these figures. They are called Kachina figures. Then you ask the Hopi literature, the book of the Hopi, which is a scientific literature, what is the Kachinas? What did they mean with Kachinas? The Kachinas were the spiritual teachers from heaven who descended to the forefathers of the Hopi. They teach them in astronomy, in different belongings. And the Hopi today still, mach noch weiter. The Hopi still today make these figures, the Kachina figures. You can buy them in souvenir shops. Kachina pictures. Simply do not forget that these gods were there, our teachers some thousands of years ago, and they promised to return in the future. So we should not forget the visit of the gods long time ago, because they will return, so that we are not afraid. Now this is today's North America, here in your country. Now take 12,000 kilometers away from here, down to South America. The same thing with an Indian tribe called the Kayapo. The Kayapo live on the upper Amazon River. Every year they have a festivity. On this festivity, their shaman dresses in a straw garment, completely covered. He has no openings for eyes, mouth, nose, nothing. And they dance around the straw man. You will just see him. And they sing the story. Long, long time ago, for their forefathers, all of a sudden there was a noise in the sky. And the being descended, a big being. They were all afraid. Finally, they realized he did not harm them. They came down out of the village. Now you see the man coming here in this corner. Within 4 days, the strangers learned the language of the native. And he told them his name was Bepe Kororosh. Bepe Kororosh means, I come from the firmament. He taught them in several belongings, as the other cases, in astronomy, in agriculture. He taught them in some forms of weapon, how it was easier to make chasings, etc. And before he left, he promised in the far future he will return again. And in order not to forget his visit, they represent every year this heavenly teacher in the form of a straw garment, straw man, with no opening for mouth or ears, etc. He was a teacher from the sky. Now, if we have such a thing only in North America, the hope is now it's worldwide. So what do we need more about all these things? They were here, and we have the reports practically in every culture. I don't understand why this is so complicated to understand it. Why our scientific community, especially our archaeologists and ethnologists, they are so blind. They cannot see it, or they don't know it. I love discussions with skeptics. It's wonderful because they lose anyhow. It doesn't matter. But I love the discussions, and when we respect each other, when we are not lying and bluffing and discussing honestly, after 2 hours, they always confess to me, Eric, we didn't know that. We never heard about these books. We never heard the word of Enoch or Ezekiel or anything. We don't know it. As soon as we know it, it all fits together. The cave paintings, the figures, the old writings, and all these things here. Now I have to change the theme very briefly because something I have to explain here which nerves me every year. You know, it's considered Palenque. Okay. Chariots of the Gods, Palenque, talking about Chariots of the Gods. Sorry, it doesn't come from smoke. I don't smoke, at least not much. No. So, in Chariots of the Gods, the cover showed a picture of Palenque. Palenque is a Maya city in Central America. And in Palenque, there are different pyramids. They call it temples. And one of these step pyramids is called the Temple of Inscription because up there they found 812 inscriptions. And in 1952, Professor Dr. Ruth Slulier discovered up here a groove in the ground, a groove in the bottom. And they chiseled it out, and inside the pyramid there was a staircase. But in 1951, the staircase was completely filled with stone. It took 3 years before all these stones were taken out of the staircase. 3 years later, they landed under the pyramid, 7 meters under the pyramid. They were standing before a big door in the form of a triangle. This was the first time we had such a door in the form of a triangle. The door was opened roughly. They destroyed it partly. The grid was made only today against the visitors. And then they stood in a room. The room was 7 meters high. And from the ceiling to down, the room was full with stalactites and stalagmites. You know, these who grow. That means the room is very, very, very old. Thousands and thousands of years older than the pyramid itself. Later, the pyramid was constructed over the room. The room existed a long time before. And there was this bottom plate, 3 meter 80 long, 2 meter 20 large, 1 block. And on the plate, an incredible drawing. You will just see it, something like a frame. In the center of the frame is someone sitting, bending forward, almost like a motorizing cyclist. He has an oxygen mask on his nose. He uses his upper hand. You will just see it here. His upper hands to manipulate control. See the lower hands. You still see the 4 fingers. He's winding up something. He's sitting on a chair. And outside of the frame, outside of the frame, you see a linking flame. Now, this was found in 1952. Of course, archaeology had immediately their explanation, archaeological explanation. They said it represents Pakal. Pakal was the second last ruler of the city of Palenque. And Pakal is sitting in the open mouth of a mythological monster. You see what? What you see here, these 2 things here, they see the teeth, the upper teeth and the lower teeth. That's the open mouth of a mythical monster. Pakal is falling into the monster. Out of his body comes the tree of life, the cross of life, etc., etc. All archaeological nonsense. In the meantime, more than 50 years have passed, and they have learned much more than before. There is a writing all around, and in the meantime, Professor Dr. Stewart and Stewart, it's the father and the son, Stewart, both brilliant American archaeologists, Maya specialists, they now are able to translate the writing around it. They said, yes, that's the most modern explanation now after 50 years. Yes, it represents Pakal, but had nothing to do with the open mouth of a mythological monster, nothing with the tree of life, nothing with the stylized hairs of the beard of the weather god and all that rubbish which we are told. The whole plate, the stone plate, has to do completely with the cosmos and with the universe. Pakal is leaving our planet Earth. I am always accused by the skeptics. I am not allowed to look at this picture crosswise. I should look at it lengthwise. Lengthwise, it looks like this. Now you know I'm a man with fantasy, and they tell me that's the only correct way to look at the plate. Say, okay, my fantasy jumps to another continent. Far away from Central America, let's go to Indonesia. In Indonesia is a big temple called the Borobudur. The Borobudur is composed of hundreds of these stupas. These figures are called stupas. For us, they look like a bell. Stupas. Now, in Buddhism, the stupa has different meanings. One of the meanings is the stupa is the smaller vehicle with which you can reach the big vehicle of the god. You remember Arjuna was taken in a Vimana up to the mother spaceship. Ezekiel was taken in a smaller vehicle up to the mountain, mother spaceship, etc. So you always have a smaller vehicle. So in Buddhism, they believe the stupa is the smaller vehicle in which you can reach the big vehicle of the gods. Now, every stupa is not empty. In every stupa, somebody is sitting. In that case, the young Buddha, because it's a Buddhistic temple. What is he doing here? He's sitting there with his two arms here, making some movements, sitting because he believes he's in the small vehicle to reach the big vehicle of the gods. Now look at this. Just look at it with modern eyes. Here we have Palenque. It becomes a stupa, and it disappears. It's all it's all a question with what eyes we look at it. But finally, worldwide, it's a similar tradition in different forms, different words, and this continues. What I said before, what nerves me, what makes me crazy every year is Nazca. You all remember Nazca. What do I have against the scientists in Nazca? Nazca is this gigantic desert, roughly 500 kilometers south of Lima in Peru. When you fly over Nazca, first you see nothing, simply a desert with brown and yellow stones and sand. And then all of a sudden you see some figures of fishes, monkeys, spiders and all kind of things, but of such overdimensional size that you can see them only from the air. Then you fly a little higher, then you see something who looks like airstrips. Starts abruptly, ends abruptly. The longest of these lines is 3.8 kilometers long, the longest. Then you see smaller lines. You know, there are these airstrip lines, lock lines, and smaller one. The longest of the smaller long lines is 23 kilometers long. Straight ahead. Huh? Huh? 23 kilometers. About 18 kilometers. 18 miles, 18 miles, roughly. So what nerves me here? Practically every year on world television, you see so-called documentaries. And when the normal people see a documentary, they believe this is science. This is real science. They teach us what is see. But in reality, they don't show us the reality. I show you now 20 pictures about Nazca, which you have never seen, neither in the scientific textbook, neither in a documentary. Spring up as next. This is Nazca. Original Nazca. Mach einfach mir weiter. Nazca. But what they show you on TV are just the figures. The fishes, the monkeys, the spiders, and so on. And they explain you, it's very, very easy to make these figures. And really, it is easy. It's not the complicated thing. You just have to scratch away the surface, the stones. And normally, a bright, shining surface appears. And with this method, you can make figures. But that's not the mystery of Nazca. Mach weiter. The mystery of Nazca are these lines. And they never show these lines on television. I said, the longest of it is 3.8 kilometers long. Look at this picture. Put it in your brain. Seal it in your brain. No, so seal it in your brain. You never see it on television. Neither on scientific textbooks. They suggest to you, Nazca, the mystery of Nazca are these figures. The figures are not the mystery of Nazca. This is the mystery of Nazca. Then you see whole mountain. The mountain top is cut off, completely cut off, artificially. And you see under the line, there are zigzag. imagine if this would be the result of scratching away the surface, the stones of the surface, then you would have scratched away the zigzag line behind it also. It's all not true, what they teach us in their documentaries. That's what nerves me. And because it nerves me, all these things, we have decided to clarify all this scientifically. You know, until today, only archaeologists have been working there. I adore archaeology. That's wonderful. And the archaeologists I know are brilliant people. It's not the question of conspiracy, etc. But archaeologists are asking different questions. They're asking how old is it? How old is this bone? How old is this fire, etc.? What is it? It's called a temple, etc. I have complete different questions. I want to know what is the chemical composition of these lines. Is it different than the next composition of the sand? I want to know what is the resistance in the electricity. Are there some magnetical anomalies? I want to find out on the scientific way what's wrong, compare these lines, compare with the desert just next to the lines. And therefore, the Eric von Däniken Foundation I had the idea to make a scientific expedition there. We found 6 universities who work together with the Eric von Däniken Foundation. One university is the Universidad Católica in Lima, Peru, because you need a local university. Without that, you never get the permission. Then we have 2 German universities, a Swiss university, etc. We need, for the scientific analysis of this, we need roughly 240,000 euros, comparable 240,000 euros. But all these universities are working together. What is left, what we don't have, is about $60,000 we left. That's why we decided to look if we find this missing $60,000 by crowdfunding. Look at this up there, the red writing. Take your note. When you are home, please go in there. Look what I say in there, what the idea is, what universities are working with it, the names of the figures, what the plan is. And maybe you have the idea, okay, I spend $20 or whatever for the crowdfunding because we want to realize this. We will start this in fall, that this international scientific team goes to Nazca and makes finally scientific analysis, not only archaeological analysis. In the textbooks, in the scientific textbook about Nazca, I have learned so far, what is it, all these lines? It's a cult for the water gods. It's an astronomical calendar. It's a cult for agriculture. It's a pre-Inca sport place, some sort of pre-Inca Olympia. It's a copies of a Fata Morgana. It's a start place of hot air balloon. These are acre plots, boundary makers, procession street, maps. It's all rubbish. Because if all you have this explanation in archaeology, where are was sind die Fußspuren, the footprints? Where are the footprints of the people going to the lines? The lines start abruptly, end abruptly, as if somebody from the air has come, and not somebody walked through it and worked it. And we want to find out all this. Some 2,500 years from now, the Greek historian Herodotus, you learned Herodotus in school, he was called, men called him the father of history. He was in Egypt, 450 BC, 2,500 years from now. He was there for many years. And he also was in Thebes. Thebes is today's Luxor on the Nile. And in his second book of history, Herodotus writes, the high priest showed him 241 statues, one statue next to the other. And the high priest gave to every statue an explanation. He explained that's the name, his name was, and he was living from then to then, etc. And at the end of the 241 statues, the high priest said to Herodotus, these 241 statues represent 11,340 years. At that time, the gods from the firmament were among the humans. 11,340 years. Now, Herodotus made this statement 2,500 years from now, but which means I have to add 2,500 to the 11,340. Roughly 14,000 years ago, according to the father of history, Herodotus, the extraterrestrials were here. Of course, in archaeology, they never took Herodotus by word. According to archaeology, the history of old Egypt starts roughly 3000 BC, but not 14,000 BC. They said, what is he talking? What is he telling rubbish? The same Herodotus, just a few lines later, in his second book of history, you can control it, chapter 141, 142, he says that under the Great Pyramid, there is a lake, and the lake has clear water, and the clear water, there is a sea. In archaeology, they never took this for serious. Now we slowly go into the pyramid. I show you the lake, the sea, and the detail of it. You know, ich weiß, komm, ich bringe gerade. So. This should be the entry, But the entry was never found until 823. Hier sieht, gang nur weiter rein. Ich habe den blöden Stift nicht, ich kann nicht erklären, das ist ein mühsamer Dreck. This is called the upcoming shaft. 23 meter long, you can climb up there, but only 1 meter high. You have to go down on your knees. After 23 meters, you come to the so-called Great Gallery. This is the Great Gallery. This is 47 meters long. Imagine that. 8.5 meters high. And here starts the first question. Why have the builders, the constructors of the pyramid, first constructed this small shaft, so small that you cannot even transport a sarcophagus in there? And then after 23 meters, this gigantic thing, we don't understand it. Then you came to two chambers. One chamber is called the king's chamber. The other chamber is called the queen's chamber. It looks like this. Now we go into the queen's chamber. That's this one here in the middle. Das ist ein Dreck. Here. Ich weiß. So, in the queen's chamber, there is a hole in the wall. This hole exists on the south side and on the north side. And it's very important to know this hole exists only since about 180 years before the wall was closed. Then a British explorer came there, and he was looking for treasures. He had a little hammer. He was hammering all the time on the wall, and it sounded hollow, and then they opened the wall. So in the beginning, that was not there. Now, inside the hole, there's a shaft. When you point in with your beam, you see it's a shaft going about 2 meters horizontal, and then starts a climbing in there. Now, mach weiter. A friend of mine, Rudolf Gantenbrink, constructed a robot. That's now over 20 years ago. This robot is a steel construction, and he entered the shaft going out from the queen's chamber. First, the 2 meter horizontal, and then the robot climbs up inside the shaft. In whole archaeology, the specialist told us the shaft is only about 8 meters long. After 8 meters, it comes to a blind end. But the robot continues. After you will just see it. First 2 meter horizontal, then starts the climbing inside. So the archaeologists believed after 8 meters, it comes to a standstill. But that was not correct. The robot continued inside. He passed the 8 meter mark, continued climbing inside the pyramid. 10 meter, 12 meter, 15 meter, 20 meter. Archaeologists could not respire anymore. They could not understand what's going on here in the Great Pyramid. He climbed up. Always the wall changed. It was granite. It was sandstone. It was basalt. All kind of different stone. You saw openings who looked like doors. Now you have to understand, this shaft is only 14 centimeters by one side. You cannot send a man in there to climb in there. Only with a robot it's possible. After 62 meters, the robot came to a standstill before a little door. The little door had something like 2 bracelets. You will just see it. There was crashings on the wall. So thousands of years ago in the past, somebody must have pressed something inside here, which left traces behind. The stones here of this wall are alabaster. Alabaster looks like a marble. Very, very polished, very precise. So these pictures were taken roughly 25 years ago by this small robot you saw before. There was a stone blocking the continuation, but the robot made it. He overtook this blocking, continued his trip inside. This was meter 32. He continued 40 meters, 50 meters, 60 meters. At 62 meters, the robot came to a standstill before a small door. And the small door had something like 2 little metallic bracelets. You will just see them. The wall here is alabaster. You see how polished and directly it is. Don't forget, you are 62 meters inside the pyramid, starting from the Queen's Chamber. Dat blöde hoer. The metallic bracelets. Now watch the next picture. The robot had a laser, and the laser beam will touch this door, and the laser beam will go under. You see the red point here? The red point here down is from the laser beam. And the laser beam will cross under the door, which means there must be something behind this door. This cannot be the end of the shaft. Again, all this was 25 meters years ago. What happened since that? At that time, 25 years ago, published was more or less informed. There was a robot in there, but you hear nothing. What happened since then? You hear nothing in the public. After this demonstration here, the American National Geographic Society came down to Egypt, and they constructed a new robot. And the new robot, he had a drilling. Zeig's weiter. And with the drilling, they made a hole into this door. You see here. And they pushed the light inside. And all what they could see, there was nothing behind it, except the next wall. It was empty. Then you see the next wall. That was the situation roughly 18 years ago. What happened since then? A rich man from Singapore, he wanted to know what's behind it, and he gave the order to construct another robot, robot number 3. The first robot was from Gantenbrink, the German, the second from your National Geographic Society, now the third robot constructed by this rich Hindu man from Singapore. And he called it the Jedi robot. Funny. They made a hole again through this wall. You see, there's the first wall with these 2 metallic bracelets. Then comes the next wall. And now he makes a hole into the next wall. A small hole, just big enough for an endoscope. They put an endoscope through it, some light. What's behind it? The next room. Mach einfach schnell weiter. You know, when you put an endoscope, you cannot make gigantic big pictures. You make hundreds of small pictures. And in the computer, you put these small pictures together to a big picture. And that was behind it. The next room. So it continues. First room, second room, third room, all behind it. You cannot, now we know exactly the geographical location. We know exactly what it is. So the skeptic will ask, why don't we go in there and open it? Because you cannot. The shaft is 62 meters high, but the shaft has only a width of 14 centimeters. You cannot climb in there. You need high-tech to do so. High-tech is very expensive. And you need a permission from the Department of Archaeology and Antiquity in Egypt. And they never give you that permission. So this continues. We know under the Great Pyramid is another room. It's called the unfinished room. The tourists normally, I guess you have all been in the pyramid. And you go in the pyramid, you can climb up the Great Gallery, but you can never climb down. In the rock under the pyramid. Here again a shaft. This time the shaft is big enough. You can climb down there. It's a little more than 1 meter. Not this one, just the next one. The shaft goes down into the rock under the pyramid. This shaft is 119 meters long. Imagine, 190 meters, going diagonally down there. And then you come to a room in the rock under the pyramid. You know, 190 meters, yeah, diagonal. If you look it directly, You are 38 meters under in the rock under the pyramid. There is a room. It's called the unfinished room. It makes absolutely no sense. 830 and 23 BC, now after Christ, the pyramid was for the first time opened by Al-Mamun. He was the ruler of Egypt at that time. He also found this room. He was down there. And he writes in his biography that down there he found 3 other rooms. 3 other rooms. In one room he found sarcophaguses with strange beings which had long, elongated head. Strange weapons which he could not understand. And strange objects in their hand. And he was afraid. He was afraid about the power of the God. He gave order to change everything down here, that no one after him could rediscover these rooms. I was down there many times. I always had a hammer with me. You knocked at the wall, and sometimes it sounds hollow. But you can do nothing. You cannot continue. Somebody has changed the whole situation down there. And now comes the story with Herodotus, who says there is a lake under the pyramid. A lake with clear water. And the clear water covers a sarcophagus. I said, archaeology never took Herodotus' word serious. He's dreaming. He speaks about 11,340 years. He speaks about the lake under the pyramid. There can be no lake. There is a lake. We were down. Ramon here, my wonderful young man, and I were down there to enter inside of the Great Pyramid. You came first to this small room. Then you go down a staircase. From this point, there is a shaft directly in the rock. Anyhow, this shaft is so large that it has room for 2 ladders. You see 2 ladders here? Then you come to a room which is in the rock of the pyramids. That room. Here, 7 niches are cut out of the rock, but only in 2 niches are some sarcophaguses. This one is black basalt. The next one is granite. The other ones are empty. Chiseled completely, perfectly chiseled out of the rock. From this point, you go deeper again. Now you just show a shaft which had room for 2 ladders. The continuation is this one. It's not the same shaft. You will see there's only room for 1 ladder. Now you are under the pyramid, deep under the pyramid. And then is in the right angle a crossing. You have to go down in your knees. A few steps and you are under the pyramid. And there is a lake, exactly as Herodotus told us, with perfectly clear water. And inside the lake is a sarcophagus, exactly as Herodotus has written 2,500 years ago. In the beginning, you see nothing. You need your eyes. We could not use flashlights here. As soon as we would use flashlight, we simply have a reflection like a mirror. And we have no picture. Now you see the sarcophagus here. In the water, covered up by clear water. They told me the sarcophagus was empty when they found it. I don't know if this is true, but that's what they told me. And it's the water. Now, the Antiquity Department of Antiquity in Egypt, they wanted, of course, to know where does this sarcophagus come from? Because the shafts are smaller than the sarcophagus. They could not transport it down there. You remember the one shaft just with 1 ladder? This is bigger. So there must be other entries. So they were pushing out the water. And here you see the same sarcophagus without the water this time. What a precision. Incredibly. That's the newest knowledge in the Great Pyramid. Okay? Ja, ich weiß von mir aus. Okay, yes. So, jetzt werden wir dann gerade bei... Ja, das lassen wir weg, gesagt. Herr Ober, lass weg. Und jetzt kommt der mein gerade Dings. Ja, passt das wie... So. The skeptics, who of course are reasonable person. I told you I love skeptics. You know, we live in a society, the scientific community always want to be reasonable, and they are afraid to be ridiculed. That's why they never touch something like UFOs or extraterrestrials. No, no, really good. So in reality, they don't know much. I am accused, and all of my thinkers are accused. We say that extraterrestrials were there, and we say that these extraterrestrials visited us from far away. This is absolutely impossible. Every child knows the distance in the universe are measured by light years. So you cannot cross these light years. The next star is roughly 4 light years away, and it could be 10 or 20 light years away, so we have no possibility to see each other. Even if extraterrestrials do exist, we never come together. That's what the skeptics say, but that's all not correct again. Imagine your American space shuttle, you have it here, bring this space shuttle. Yeah. With every shot up there, you can transport a heavy load of 30 tons. Now it's just a question of money. How much money do you invest? If you have 3 space shuttles, for the moment you have none, you work together with the Russians, if you have 3 or if you have 30. If you have 30 space shuttles, then you would start every week, not every few months, every week. And every week you would transport 30 tons of heavy load into the orbit between Earth and the Moon. These heavy loads are prefabricated blocks. You cut them all together to a gigantic spaceship. The spaceship has the shape of the form of a ring. This is a must, because when you have the form of a ring, you turn the spaceship, and by turning around its own axis, you create an artificial gravity inside by centrifugal force. So you always have ground under your feet. You are not weightless. And then you have to put a propellant in there, and slowly this spaceship starts to move. Slowly. If it only would reach 2% of the speed of light. I'm not speaking of over speed of light, all this scientific. Just 2% of the speed of light. You would reach the distance of 10 light years within 500 human years. Now you say, come on, 500 human years. No one of us will become 500 human years old. It's not necessary. This is a generation spaceship. On board you make love, you make children, grandchildren, and on. So after 500 years, you have reached the distance of 10 light years. So it's absolutely possible to move in the stars, between one of the other, one star and the other. Even with primitive technology, not with light speed or nearly coming to light speed. Of course it is possible. The critics, the skeptics never mentioned this possibility. Generation spaceship. Then the next accusation is always, even if extraterrestrials do exist, even if they could reach us, they would never look like we. They would never look like humans. They would maybe look like elephants or flying tentacles or whatever, but never like us. This is wrong again. And this is a theory which I shortly explain. Panspermia. Panspermia was brought into the world by the Swedish Nobel Prize winner, Mr. Arrhenius. That was 90 years ago. The following idea is panspermia. You go out with the spaceship, as I explained. You create a new society. And now the first society has an interest to spread out themselves. As we have plans at the moment, we want to go to Mars. And from Mars, we go to the next solar system, and so on. Spread out yourself. Spread out yourself means humans are spreading out themselves. You can do it also by spermia. This is why panspermia. You infect a section of your Milky Way with your own informations of life. And it will work, and you create on planets which are similar to the planet Earth a new evolution of form of life. This is panspermia. Mach nochmal weiter. It works. So it was quite possible that extraterrestrials look like us or look similar to us. All the arguments, this is not possible, they are not looking like us, forget it. It is possible to reach the distances, it is possible that they look like this. Auf den Rest verzichten wir da. So, unfortunately, my time is over and I have to stop. I want to remember you, take your time and look at this crowdfunding, because that's something which I have in my soul. I want to have scientific results concerning Nazca. I want to shock the world again with scientific, clear results and say, I'm sorry, what are you telling us? Here we have the scientific results brought together by 5 different universities. We can do it, and we will bring it to public. Ladies and gentlemen, you were listening to me. Yeah. Thank you.